In this video, I'm going to introduce you to JavaScript as a language. Now, JavaScript is a language that started out as kind of not as important of a language, and has become over time one of the most important programming languages that exists. Now, JavaScript actually doesn't have anything to do with Java, but it is a completely separate language from that. In JavaScript, its most common form is actually built into your web browser. So it's the programming language that's most commonly used in your web browser. So if you can see on the screen, on the left-hand side I have a text editor opened, in this case Notepad++, and on the right side I have a browser opened, in this case Firefox. And so I've opened this little file that I created to kind of demonstrate some of the key features of JavaScript. Now, if I want to, I can, at least in Notepad++, I can select Run and launch in Firefox or in Chrome. I don't have Safari on this computer, but I can go and launch that file, and it will open it up over here in Firefox. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is that in your text editor, when you make changes, they don't immediately appear over here. Now, there are some editors that are like that, but for your basic text editor, that's not the case. So if I go and change something, then I will need to refresh the page over here. And Firefox is pushing this refresh button or pushing the F5 character or key. So over here we have, this is a web page, an HTML file. We're going to learn more about HTML files later in the semester. But this one I want to make you aware of some of the basic features to it. So for example, right at the top we have this little head section. And so here's the head section. And there's a little head tag here. It's got the less than sign and the greater than sign surrounding it. And then down here we have a slash head, which closes off the head section. So this little section of our document is the head section. And then right here we have the title with an open title tag and a closed title tag. This is HTML. And this right here says JavaScript Introduction. And that title is what's displayed on, at least on Firefox, right here on this tab. So if we could change that if we wanted to. We'll come back to these other sections down here, or up here in just a minute. Now down at the bottom here, we have the body section, all right, surrounded by two body tags. And the body section contains usually the content that you're putting on the page. So one of the things that I've put on this page, for example, is this H1 tag, which opens here and closes here, and that is a header tag. So it says JavaScript Introduction also, just like the title does, and that corresponds with this header right here on Firefox. And then the next thing down is another header tag. This one happens to be an H3 tag, which means a slightly smaller header, a less important header. There's H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this one has this. And we can go and actually change this and put in our name. And again, remember, it doesn't automatically change on the right. We have to save it and then refresh the page, and then it will appear over here. Now below that, I have another header called outputs, and then I have these little dividers, div tags. And one thing you'll notice that this particular div tag, I've given it an identifier, an ID, and this one's called A. IDs have to be unique, so no other element on the page can be called ID A except for this one, or else it's an error. And so this one has A, B, C, and D. We're going to use those as we go along. And then down below that, those correspond to just some text right here that's blank right now because there's nothing in here. If we wanted to, we could type, put an A value in between that tag and refresh that, and we could see that div has an A value right now. We'll take that one out for now. And then also below here, we have a little bit of text. Okay, this is just plain text. It's not inside a particular tag here. And then we have this input type. So right here we have, it's basically just a text box where we can put values in here, numbers or text, and that's important. I have initially set it to be a value of 50. That's the initial value. So when you just start the page, it's a value of 50. But we could change that to a value of 75 or 754, whatever we would like to do it. But if we refresh the page, the default value is going to be that value of 50. Now this one has an ID of input text, And so we're going to need to remember that one as well. Now the other thing you might have noticed is in the body section, there's this one says on load, and then it says introduction, open close parentheses, and a semicolon. And then down here I also have on change, introduction, open close parentheses, and semicolon. What that means is that whenever the body loads, whenever that happens, the web browser knows that a function of JavaScript called introduction is going to be loaded. And then anytime that down here, anytime that this input box changes, the the browser knows that the introduction function is going to be called. So a function is simply a block of code. It's simply a collection of lines of code that are run right after the one, that you run one right after the other. And right now I have right up here at the top here in this in the head section, there's also this script tag and a closed script tag, and inside of that I have function introduction. So whenever the page loads, that's what ends up getting run. So we could do something very kind of silly and then use the alert command, which isn't used very often anymore, and say and we could type that in the alert function, and the way that function, the syntax for that is we put whatever we want to have show up in the alert inside of our open and close parenthesis. And then in JavaScript, almost every line needs to be finished with a semicolon. All of the commands we give, at least, need to be finished with a semicolon, or it's technically an error. Now there's some exceptions to that as we get into more advanced things, which isn't really part of this assignment, where we do if statements and loops and other things. Some of those don't have semicolons at the end. But all of the statements, the commands that we give, this is a command to show an alert box. And so now if we go and refresh this page, there's an alert box that pops up immediately whenever that body loads and runs that introduction function. And if you remember right, we also have it so that anytime that text box changes, it should also run that alert function. Okay. Now that's kind of a silly thing for it to do. We don't, need to bug our users with alerts all the time. But let's go and learn how we can kind of do some JavaScript commands. Now there's a bunch of resources online about JavaScript. It's a very important programming language. I've linked to some Code Academy. I've linked to some of the other tutorials and references for this. There's a ton of resources out there for JavaScript. Let me just go through some of the very basics. So one thing that we have in programming languages are called variables. And so we can, in JavaScript, we can define a variable by using the keyword, var. And you'll notice in my text editor, Notepad++, it knows that this is an HTML file, and it knows that in JavaScript that function is a keyword, and var, that's also a keyword. It means something important to the language. And so let's make a little variable. We'll call this our variable a, and we'll assign this to be the number 2. Okay, so what this statement does is it says, hey, create a new variable that has the name a and assign it the value of 2, and then end the function. So the variable that you're changing is on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and the value you're changing it to is on the right-hand side. So we could do the same thing. We could go and make another variable, b, and we can assign that to the value of 3, for example. And then what if we were to say, okay, well, let's take a third variable c, and assign that to be a plus b. Now, when this runs, what should the value of c end up being? Well, hopefully, if we've assigned the value of 2 to a and the value of 3 to b, then by the time it gets down here and we evaluate this command, then c should be 5, should be a plus b. And we can even do something like alert c, and then we can refresh this, save and refresh this page, and it'll pop up with the value of 5. Okay. Now, sometimes we don't want to always have alerts there, And so there's a couple ways we can view these variables as we're going, and we can kind of stop through our code and see what's going on. And so in Firefox has really nice tools for this. Chrome has some okay tools as well. I actually use both depending on what I'm trying to look at. So if you're in Firefox, and I think that's a good browser to use, it's available on Mac and on Windows and on Linux. You can open up Firefox, a newer version, and go to Developer, and there are a lot of different developer tools. And so first of all, I think the best one actually to open up is probably the debugger. We can actually get to all these tools from the same interface, but let's open up the debugger. And I don't know if this is difficult to see, as the text is a little bit smaller on this, but here is our code here. And one of the things we can do in our debugger is we can stop the execution of the code. So I've clicked on this line 26 right now, and it's put a little what we call a breakpoint. So that if I refresh this page and that function starts to run, then it actually stops. All right, the code execution stops. And right now I have only a variable a and b and c. They're coming up, but they're undefined right now, okay, in our variable window. And we can use the buttons right here to kind of walk through this. And we can say, oh, okay, well, after this line of code runs, not before because it hasn't run yet, after this line of code runs, what should the value of a be? Oh, well, it should be 2. And so now that value has been assigned. And what happens next? Oh, okay, B just got assigned the value of 3. And then C, C now gets assigned the value of 5. And then we run the alert. All right, so you can kind of step through your code. If you have an error or you want to know what's going on, you can kind of see what's going on in this debugger view. Now, another thing you can do is if you don't want all these alerts, you could also use another command called console.log, and we could put C in there. And what this happens is instead of, we'll take out this breakpoint, when we refresh this, save and then refresh this page, then what will happen is in the console right here, anything that goes to is logged to the console will show up in this little window here, and we can see that value of 5. We can also do other things with variables. Variables don't have to be numbers. In fact, they don't even have to be whole numbers. Whole numbers in programming is called integers, but we could set a variable d and assign that to 3.5, and that's called a float number. And then we could write that out to our console and refresh the page over here, and now we have both of those variables. The 5 was logged to the console, was c, a plus b, and the 3.5. Now there's other commands that we can do. Let's maybe do something a little more interesting. So why don't we go and do some code like, why don't we assign d to be a times b. We use the asterisk character to do that, and we can refresh and we can see, oh, okay, well now this variable is a times b, which is 2 times 3, and now we have that variable, which is great. Or we could even do now, then, maybe we want to divide all of that by the value of c, which is 5 at this point. Well, just like in math problems, we can put parentheses to designate order of operations, and then use the slash character, the forward slash, to do division, and then we can divide by c. And when we write that out to the console, we now get our variable. All right, now notice that we have this 6 divided by 5, and so we get 1.2. Now, is the value really 1.2? Well, it's actually not. So let's pause for a sec. I'm sorry, I misspoke on there. It actually is 1.2. I was thinking we were going backwards. So let's now do the way that I thought we were going, and do c divided by a times b. And let's see what shows up now. So now we have this decimal number, and at some point in time it gets rounded to some precision. Now variables can also be text. So why don't we assign d? We don't have to to use the variable keyword to establish this variable. We've already done that. We've already declared this variable. So we can now assign D to a different number or even some text. We can call D, you know, maybe we could call it, you know, root beer, all right? And notice that it's, because this is text, I've had to surround it out around by quotes. You can use double quotes or single quotes in JavaScript. And we'll do, write that out to the log, and if we run this now, you'll see that D used to be a number, and we wrote it out to the log, but then it becomes text, which in programming languages we call strings of characters. So strings is our text. Now, here's another question though. What would happen though if we were to say, let's take this value. Okay, we have D, and it right now it's called root beer. All right, why don't we just use that value, and why don't we add A to that? What's going to happen here? We have text and a number, and we use the addition command. All right. Well, let's see what happens here. Well, now we see we've done something different. Okay, so this plus command has multiple meanings. It can mean add numbers together if we're talking about numbers, but if we're not talking about numbers, if we're talking about text and anything else, then whether it's a number or another piece of text, what it does is called it concatenate. So it adds the text plus a text version of whatever that number happens to be. All right, now what if we wanted to use, actually let's do something else first. What if we want to now display this on our page, not just put it in our console, which nobody can see unless they open the developer mode? What if we wanted to display this out to the page? Here's what we can do. Now we've decided to, and I've already set up your programming project and this introduction page to include this line of code right here. So this line of code says to go out to Google actually and download, as part of this web page, also download this JavaScript file. It's called jQuery. jQuery is probably the most widely used JavaScript file out there, and Google has decided to host it. And one thing that's great about Google hosting it is, one, they have super fast servers, but number two is because so many pages use this code, if everyone uses this exact code, this exact link to Google, then every time your browser needs jQuery, it will usually just look on your computer to see if it's already downloaded it previously for another page, and if it's already there, it just uses that copy, which is great. It speeds up, and it doesn't, you don't have the latency of going out to the internet. So there's a few ways we can do things, like we can change the values of divs, which is what we're going to do in just a second, but we're going to do it the jQuery way. And the jQuery way is a little bit of shorter syntax, and I've given you some examples to do that. Let me show you how this works to write out to jQuery. In jQuery, this is the syntax, the commands that you have to use, and I'll kind of walk you through it. In jQuery, you use the $sign to start off commands. And so we're going to talk in jQuery about, first of all, this element. That's element A. And so right here, what this means is it says, hey, jQuery, I want you to go and get the element on the page that has an ID, that's what the $sign represents, an ID of A. And so right now it's going down here and it's getting, this div tag right here that has an ID of A. So that's what that means. Give me the tag down here that has an ID of A. And then we're going to say dot and text, and we're going to assign it. Why don't we assign it to our variable A for now? So this is a little bit different syntax. This is the jQuery way of changing things, and I think it's useful to use on this project because it simplifies things quite a bit. We can write this all in one line rather than 2 or 3 lines, or adding commands together in one line. And so if we then refresh that, save it and refresh it, you'll now see that this div tag, we've now given the value of A. And we could do a similar thing with the B tag. save and refresh, and so forth, and we could even do, let's do the D tag while we're at it. There we go. And we could even do something like this. So this is the value that gets assigned, but we could use concatenation inside of there. And so we could even write something like, variable D, and then use that plus symbol to concatenate this string text with this variable, which also has text in it. Save and refresh that, and now we have the whole value there all concatenated together. So that's pretty cool, where we can now manipulate, we can manipulate in memory these variables, but then we can also display them various places on our page. Now the next thing I want to talk about though is what happens if we want to get a value that a user's inputted, like this text box right here. Well, if we just want to deal with the text, it's pretty easy to do. Okay, there's kind of a jQuery way of doing that, and so I'm gonna show you the jQuery way. So the jQuery way to get that variable out, to get that 50 out, is to go and to again we're going to use our $, and we're again going to identify which is the ID for that particular element. And if we scroll down, we can see that that little text box has an ID of input text. I'll just copy that for save some time. And then we can use the val or the value function. Oops, open close parentheses to get the value of that. Okay, so that just gets it. It doesn't assign it to anything. And so why don't we, do something like variable, let's call it E, and we'll assign that to that, and then we'll write out, we just do, just so we can see that we got it. All right, oh, we didn't get it. All right, so let's go see what our problem is here. All right, so we made an error in our code, and if you've been following along, maybe you already caught it, maybe you didn't. But one thing that you have to do in the jQuery syntax is when we're identifying an ID of an element on our page, we have to make sure that we put in the number sign or the pound sign in before there. So if we save that and we refresh that, now you'll see that we've grabbed that 50 out of there. Now in our console though, one thing you might notice though, at least in this version of Chrome, is that our numbers are represented as kind of red values, 5 and the 0.33 or 8.83, etc. But the text is represented by kind of an orange color. So we're grabbing this 50 from this text box as text. But what if we wanted to do math with it? Well, that becomes a little bit trickier, okay? And this is a part of the project that people will have a little hard time with right off the bat. And I want to try to easier way into it. So in programming, when we're trying to take a value, usually from text, and we're trying to make it into a number, usually, we call that parsing a value. And so we can use a function. I'm going to use a function called parse float. And so right now I'm going to say, okay, let's do variable. Actually, why don't we just use this line that we've already written here. I'm going to add in the parse float command. Now notice that the P is lowercase and the F is uppercase. JavaScript is case sensitive, so you need to be careful of that when you're typing in your commands. A lot of things are lowercase, but some of them are not. So parse float, and then we'll put another parenthesis around that. So our parse float command has an open and close parentheses, and then inside of that was the code we already wrote. So now if we run that command, you'll notice that in our console that the 50 is actually a number. Okay, so parse float means that we're looking for a decimal number. Now 50 wasn't a decimal number, and so it's still displayed it as just a 50 without any decimals. But we could put in 0.5 here, and our values would run again because we changed it, and we would get a 50.5. So that's an important command you're going to need to do for a couple pieces of your project, is to parse out a value out of a text box and make it into a number by using the parse float command. Now, last couple things I want to show you. We're not going to do anything super complex in this project. So I've already showed you how to do addition. I've already showed you how to do multiplication and division. Not surprisingly, subtraction uses the minus sign, the subtract command. Also making variables negative. So for example, if we wanted to make e negative, we could say, you know, e is assigned to negative e. And if we were to run that again, you'd see that we'd have a negative 50 here. So, you know, or if we wanted to do e minus c, you know, now we'd subtract that value of c, and so we'd get a 45. So that's the minus command. But in the part C, or part 3 of this project, you're going to need to exponentiate, and that's a little bit more challenging. You'll have to use a particular command, which is the math.pow command, okay, or the power, bring something to a power from the math library. Let me show you how you do that. So let's say let's do a new variable f, and we're going to assign that to be the math. In this case, the m is capitalized, .pow, the POW is lowercase, and then the command works like this. So normally, so far, we've been using some of these actually other functions that people have written, like the val function and the log function, and we've just been putting one thing in some of them, like console.log, or we've been putting, you know, nothing in them. The math.pow function actually takes two pieces of information. We call them arguments that we're putting in. It takes the value that you're trying to, you know, exponentiate. Okay, so maybe let's do 2 to the 3rd power. So 2 times 2 times 2, that's 3. Oh, there's my child in the background. So 2 and then 3. So 2 comma 3. Those are the two arguments there. And then we'll go, let's see if we can get that to work. And there's our 8. You know, if we were bringing 2 to the 4th power, that should be 16. And there we go with 16. Right? So you're going to need the math.pow function for the third part of your project to exponentiate a number. So it's the number, the base number, and then what power you're raising it to. Now, sometimes along the way, though, you might write some code that's not working, or you just don't want to see it, or maybe you want to give yourself some explanation. And you'll see this in the programming project. But let's say that we wanted to add a comment in here that wouldn't run, the JavaScript wouldn't run, but it might help us to understand. And so we could put something in here like, you know, apparently I can't, oh, I did spell it correctly, exponentiating a number. And so this blue, in Notepad++, it marks it as blue. This / represents a comment. Now, if you really want to do multiple line comments, like let's say we wanted to, you know, maybe get rid of a few lines of code here, these 4 lines here, you can also do a /*, and then when you want to close it, do */. And so that's a multi-line comment to comment something out. We'll leave those up for now. All right, now the last little piece that I want to show you, and it has to do with lists, because in part 1 of the project, you're going to need to deal with lists. Now, you don't have to create any lists. I'm going to show you briefly how we're going to create a list, just so we can work with one. But you will have to work with a list just a little bit, because the functions that I've already written for you in the library that's provided actually give you a list. It hands you a list, and you're going to need to get some values out of it. So JavaScript's a little different. They use a little different number or words than some other things for various different types of lists. Some programming languages are more specific. We're going to create a list, and we'll just call this my list. Okay, so this is a new variable, and we're going to say that it is of type array. That's actually a pretty terrible name for a list, because arrays mean very different things in some programming languages. They don't mean lists. And so it's just a bad name, but in JavaScript, that's what we're going to use. In other languages, this data structure that we're going to be using is called a dictionary or a map. And so this is a list that we're creating that's going to have some keys and some values, or really they have key value pairs. So there's going to be one piece of information that identifies a second piece of information. Sort of like in a database where you've got a primary key that identifies a value in some field. It's going to be kind of like that. Let me show you how it works. So let's first of all add some values to our list. So we're going to go my list. And the syntax that we use to work with lists is to use square brackets. So I'm going to add the value of x, that's going to be the key I'm going to add, and I'm going to assign that to the value of 4. And then I'm also going to do, very quickly, I'm going to pause for a second, copy and paste a couple more values to the list. All right, so now we've got 3 values in our little list. We've got the value, a key of x that corresponds with 4, a key y that corresponds with 5, and a key z that corresponds with 6. And so if we wanted to now do something and use those, we could go and say, why don't we just use d? We've been playing around with d quite a bit. There's the variable d. Why don't we get the value out for the item that has a key of z? And so we're going to go my list colon z, the key, close colon, and that's it. And then let's see if we can see this. So if we now save and refresh this, you'll see that the very bottom number is actually the value 6, which is what we retrieved from the key z in our list. And so, for example, in your project, you're going to have to get different values out of the financial information list, like using keys like name and bid price and things like that. So just be aware you're going to have to do a little bit of working with lists, retrieving information out of them. All right, the last 2 items that I want to cover briefly is what happens if we're dealing with large numbers. So let's do a new variable. Why don't we do, let's see, we've gotten to f, why don't we do g, variable g, and we'll assign this to be a large number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0.6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so this is a decimal number, a float, we call it oftentimes. And so that's our variable. Now, what if we're talking about currency here? Well, if this is currency, maybe we don't really care that this is 6, 7, 8, 9. We don't really care that this is, 6,789 10,000ths of a cent. Maybe that doesn't really, or of a dollar, I'm sorry. Maybe that doesn't matter as much to us. Maybe we just really want it to be 68 cents and round it off. Now, in some programming languages, this is a very simple, easy process. It's not too bad in JavaScript, but it's not as easy as in some languages. Well, let me show you, though. If we want to display to the console or to the page, perhaps. In fact, why don't we do it to the page instead of the console? So we'll use our jQuery syntax, and we're going to go to div d, and we'll change that one for now because we don't have a div g. So div d.text, and the value that we're going to put in there is we want to put in g, but we want to put it in so that it only has a couple of decimal points. So the way that we need to do this is we take the name of the variable, which is g, and we're going to use the command toFixed, and notice that the t is lowercase and the f is uppercase, and give it the value of a 2. That's how many decimal places we're going to use. So if we now run this, we should see that, there we go, our output right here, which is d actually, has been assigned to whatever was the value of g, but only to 2 decimal places. All right, so that's one way of making a value only have 2 decimal places. The other one I want to do, why don't we just use, I'll copy this piece for now. We'll switch up to have C display something different. What if we instead wanted to add some commas in? Well, that's also a little bit tricky. Maybe we'll do a different variable here. So let's do variable h is 54321, and it's a whole number. We won't deal with decimals in this example. But what if we really want to have commas in there? Because the 54,321, it makes sense, for us to have 54, 321, just so we can see the large number. Especially if this number was really, something much larger, like 98. Well, we have a very large number there. So we can actually use, if we want to deal with the commas and add those in, we can use the variable name, and then we use this particular function. We use, excuse me, the toLocale string function with no arguments in there. Now that doesn't always work in everywhere around the world, because in this country, the locale strings are to have the commas in there, which we set in there. You can see the commas right here. But in other countries, that's not necessarily the case, and so the toLocale string will actually look and see, hey, are you using U.S. English? Are you using British English? Are you using German? Are you using whatever language you're using? And it will format the number to that particular locale. But it's a nice way, at least for us in this country, to use commas. So I think that will get us pretty much through the project as far as skills go. Obviously, you'll have to solve different problems here. You'll have to do things like format numbers. You'll have to multiply numbers. You'll have to create multiple variables. You'll have to, use the math.pow function to calculate some monthly payment. You'll have to use all of these tools, but hopefully that's kind of an overview of JavaScript and where you're going, so that you can go and complete the project.